Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Liking the video helps out so much. Let's see if we can reach 1,000 on this one. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. We are less than 100 subscribers away from 136,000. Anyway, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad break after this intro. There will not be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Carl was dead. He passed in the night, too weak from the cold and hunger to keep fighting. I couldn't blame him. I was about ready to go myself. Cold permeated every molecule of my being. The memory of what warm felt like had long since vacated my mind. Forming thoughts had become as hard as moving my fingers, purple from the frostbite that ate away at them. The only thoughts I still had now were those of hunger. Staring at Carl's corpse, it looked less and less like my friend, and more like another day on this earth. I lay down on the stone floor, my head cocked towards what was left of Carl. His pale gray skin was flaked with ice crystals, his tongue hanging out of his mouth, purple and bloated. I licked my lips at the thought of biting into it, aching for the feeling of anything in my stomach, anything to fill the void in my abdomen that screamed for food. "Carl?" I rasped, my throat igniting into hellfire at the effort. I waited for an answer, my ears straining against the howl of the wind for a sound, any proof of life. I closed my eyes against the hunger. "Ted, you still with me, buddy?" My eyes shot open. I stared at the corpse on the ground before me. His eyes were still glazed over, tongue still jutting out from his mouth like a plum ripe for the picking. "Teddy, you did it. You lasted longer than me, old friend." His voice was as it had been when the blizzard hit. He still had the SoCal accent, with that nasally note snow always gave him. When was the last time I heard that voice? It had been a couple of days. Or was it weeks? "Carl?" I croaked again, the strain almost too much to handle. "That's right, Ted. Your good buddy Carl in the flesh." I blinked. His lips weren't moving, but that was Carl's voice. "You won, Teddy. You remember our deal? Winner gets to eat the other person. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, right, dude?" As a matter of fact, I couldn't remember the deal. I couldn't remember much of anything since we crawled into the cave. My stomach had resorted to eating memories. Anything to keep going. I attempted to respond, but my throat failed me, only managing a guttural moan. "That's the spirit. Looks like the Tedster is still kicking. Look, I don't want you to die too, buddy. No reason for both of us to go, right?" Carl had a point. He always was the smart one. He had booked the ski tickets at a steal after all. And why should we both die? God couldn't be that cruel, right? Taking out two friends who went out for a little fun in the snow? No. "Now you're cooking, Teddy. Don't let me just go to waste. I wouldn't do that to you." My fingers tensed on their own, twisting into claws against the stone. My arms pulled. The sound of my jacket scraping the stone and ice filled my ears as I inched towards Carl. My sense of touch, long since killed by the cold. "That's it, Teddy. You were nearly there." My legs followed behind me limply as I drew nearer. Closer to Carl, closer to food. The smell of death began to permeate the air. It was intoxicating, better than any Thanksgiving dinner. Every pull towards his corpse gave me renewed energy. Carl really was a good friend. My fingers hooked into Carl's jacket. With one last heave, I pulled myself on top of him, my face pressed into the icy surface of his cheek. "Way to go, Tedster. Hard part's over. Claim your prize." I licked my lips in anticipation, slowly forcing my jaw open. my frozen muscles popping and straining from underuse, lowering my teeth down until they touched the pale flesh of his emaciated jaw muscle. Nice, Teddy. Just a little bite. My jaw closed slowly like a hydraulic press. My teeth pressed into his flesh, meeting resistance as the pressure started to grow. The flesh gave like biting into frozen ice cream. My eyes rolled back into my head from the pleasure of eating. I had taken eating for granted. It was no longer a task that had little meaning. I would treasure eating forever, all thanks to Carl. My jaw slowly closed around the hunk of flesh. I chewed once, twice, then swallowed. A low growl of pleasure escaped my lips as I felt the flesh slide down into my stomach. That a boy, Teddy. Don't stop now. Food's getting cold. I started biting and chewing with new ferocity. It was a blur of motion the cave had not seen since the first day we entered. Primal hunger took over as I devoured Carl, as I ate the last gift he had ever given me. I ate Carl over the next few days, stripping his clothes and layering them on myself. I didn't shiver as much anymore. First was all of the flesh, his face, arms, legs, torso, even his butt. Then the soft organs. His heart was sweeter than anything I had ever eaten. It makes sense. Carl was a nice guy. By the time I had eaten his trachea, I could stand and walk freely around the cave. Look at you go, Teddy, looking just like Schwarzenegger now. Carl's voice echoed through the cave. The last thing to eat was Carl's brain. I held the rock in my hand, the sharp edges digging into my palms. Waste not, want not, Tedster. I wasn't going to waste any of Carl. The rock echoed off his skull with a dull crunch. I brought it down again and again, until I couldn't take it anymore, and began tearing his skull apart with my bare hands. The rock left covered in blood on the cave floor. As I wiped my mouth and sat back, I looked out at the cave's mouth. The snow had stopped. How long ago had it ended? How long was I eating Carl? I walked out into the gray afternoon, the sun already starting to dip towards the horizon. Stumbling, I followed it. I walked all night. Night turned to day, then back to night. I walked knowing if I stopped, I wouldn't get back up. The landscape around me was dead and infinite. All of the trees looked the same, their gnarled branches protruding like bony fingers down towards me. I walked until my legs gave out, face planting in the snow. My eyes got heavy as I lay there, my vision reduced to a pinhole as I drifted off into sleep. When I awoke, the first thing I noticed was the lack of cold. Warmth? A rhythmic beeping filled the air as I willed my eyes to show me where I was. No matter how hard I tried, how many times I blinked, I could only see white. I groaned, earning a shocked gasp off to my right. I spent the next 2 weeks in the hospital. I had been missing 3 months when the park rangers found me. Frostbite had destroyed my fingers, toes, and other patches of skin. My walk through the woods gave me snow blindness, which explained the gauze wrapped over my eyes when I awoke. Worst of all, I had lost almost 80 pounds, but thanks to Carl, I was alive. I was hooked to a feeding tube for those 2 weeks while I recovered. Doctors said I wouldn't be able to process solid food for a while after my stomach had gone so long without it, but I knew that was a lie. When they released me at the end of 2 weeks, I was a new man. The cops asked me questions about what happened. Where had I gone? How did I survive? Where was Carl? I didn't answer, unable to remember anything but the taste of Carl's flesh. That was something I would never forget, and something these people wouldn't understand. Carl had given me a gift, and I wouldn't waste it locked in a jail cell. They let me go, and I boarded a plane to California. The first thing I did when I got home was stop at my favorite burger joint. I sat in my car holding the biggest burger they had on the menu. Real food, I took a big bite and paused. It didn't have any flavor. I swallowed the hunk of meat disappointed. Maybe my taste buds hadn't come back yet. I ate the burger slowly, sitting in silence. As I took the last bite, I threw my car door open and vomited all of it back up onto the pavement. Maybe the doctor was right. I wasn't ready for solid food yet. I returned to my apartment, getting lost a few times along the way, sticking the key in the lock and giving it a turn. I saw her. She was more beautiful than I remembered. Ted! Her hands shot up, covering her mouth as tears flowed over her cheeks. Hey, Jess, I said hoarsely, tears welling up in my eyes. She ran over, wrapping me in a hug tight enough to split a boulder. Her words came flowing out like music to my ears. I had made it home. Thanks, Carl. Life returned to some semblance of normalcy. I was fired from my job. Not that I had a desire to work right now anyway. Jess put me on a liquid diet following the doctor's orders. The shakes and broths had no flavor and left me hungry no matter how full my stomach felt. That was fine for the first week, but the longer I was home, the more frustrated I had become not being able to eat real food. The only real difference in my life was the dreams. I had 2 recurring dreams that filled my mind at night. The first, my teeth sinking into Carl's flesh, except in the dream he was sitting up, his dead eyes staring into mine while his mouth contorted into a wide smile. His teeth just a little too sharp. His skin pulled a little too tight. That's right, Teddy. Gotta get your strength back, buddy. He would coo as my teeth ripped and pulled skin and muscle off his bones. The second dream was something I couldn't remember seeing. I was walking through the woods completely nude. Snow and wind whipped past me, but I couldn't feel the cold. I could hear Carl's voice through the dead woods beckoning me closer. Here, Tedster. I'm just over here. I was trudging through the snow after him. His voice was different. The accent was gone, replaced by a malice I've never heard any voice utter. The voice never got any closer no matter how far I walked. I would call out for him in the same voice I'd had in the cave, a hoarse croak that echoed off the trees. I awoke with a start one night. How long had I been home again? Time was losing meaning. It's strange how meals help mark the passage of time. I reached over, placing a hand on Jess. Her soft, warm skin was a comfort. My stomach growled loudly as I traced the curvature of her arm. Maybe I could eat real food again. It couldn't hurt, could it? I padded softly to the kitchen, making myself a sandwich. Sitting down at the kitchen table with only the fridge light illuminating me, I took a bite. Nothing. No taste to speak of. Swallowing, I devoured the sandwich, savoring the feeling of food going down my throat. How's the sandwich, Teddy? I froze, looking around the dark kitchen, searching for the source, searching for Carl. I stood up from the table, an intense nausea flooding my whole body. Running to the guest bathroom, I barely had time to raise the toilet seat before a spew of greasy black bile erupted from my mouth. Yeah, I was never much of a turkey guy myself. Carl's voice echoed inside the small room. I heaved until my stomach was empty again. The hunger gnawed at my stomach like a rabid dog. Flushing the toilet, I sat on the floor and cried, my back against the wall as I pulled my knees to my chest. Cheer up, Teddy. At least you got to have it for a little while. I looked around again, alone in the dark. The cold linoleum pressed into my backside. Carl, where are you? I asked quietly. Where do you think, buddy? I couldn't let you just leave me in the cave, you know. I stood up slowly, backing myself into the corner. No, you're dead. I ate you. You let me live. His chuckle filled my ears. My skin went cold, goosebumps covering my arms. Did Carl chuckle? He always had the stupid laugh that could bring out a smile even on the worst days. But a chuckle? Unnerved, I went back to bed. That was the first time Carl talked to me, but not the last. The next few weeks were hell. I was starving, Jess left to go to a conference in LA for work, leaving me all alone, surrounded by food I couldn't eat without throwing up, unless it went through a blender first. The gray sludge in the blender had no taste. It had no substance. No matter how much I drank, I never felt full. I sat crying in the kitchen floor with the fridge door left wide open. The shelves were bare as I had blended every morsel of food and consumed it. Egg, ham, lettuce, cheese, even raw hamburger meat, jammed into the blender and blended to a puree. It didn't even scratch the hunger within me. "Whoa, eating for two, buddy?" Carl's voice taunted from everywhere. "Please make it stop." I sobbed into the empty house. "Oh, I can't make it stop, Teddy. You made your choice. You have to live with it." His voice was different, sharper, cruel and cold despite his teasing words. I hardly noticed. The growl of my stomach louder than the concern in my head. I crawled over the floor towards the trash can, knocking it to the floor and spilling its contents. In a frenzy, I began devouring whatever scraps of food that were left in the bag. How the mighty have fallen, Ted. I didn't care what Carl had to say, shoveling scraps of whatever seemed edible into my mouth. It had no taste. The familiar feeling of nausea hit me. I ran to the bathroom, standing over the sink as a black bile projected out of my mouth. I cried, panting as I fought for breath. Looking up in the mirror, I froze. I watched in horror as a piece of intestine quickly retracted from my open mouth back down my throat. I blinked. My mind must be breaking, the starvation making me see things. I stared into the mirror. My shirt moved just a fraction, like a wrinkle releasing from the fabric. I tore it over my head, staring at my stomach, watching in horror. The intestine snaked its way around my bloated stomach. "I couldn't let you leave me in that cave, Teddy." I was frozen. The only thought filling my head was the starvation that racked my body. My eyes fell on my reflection. The eyes in the mirror were not my own, sunken into my skull, ringed with black bags from exhaustion. My hair had thinned, stringy patches where a full head of brown hair had once grown, the intestine coiling around my abdomen. "You need to eat, Teddy. You know what you have to eat." The intestine continued to coil. I could feel it sliding around my stomach, stoking the flame of my hunger. I heard the key sliding into the lock of the front door. "It's supper time, Ted." The words echoing within my very skull. It was no longer Carl's voice. I heard the door open, Jess calling out that she was home. How long had she been gone? My stomach growled audibly in response. "Remember our deal, Teddy." I heard Jess gasp as she entered the kitchen, its disarray startling her. "Ted, are you here?" she called shakily. My fingers tensed on their own, contorting into claws. "Food's getting cold," the voice whispered within my soul. I wish I could say I fought it, that I snapped out of it and got help. I wish I could say I did the right thing, but I didn't. I sit in my kitchen typing out this account. By the time you find this post, and the crushed bones of the woman I love, I will be on a plane back to North Dakota. The hunger is gone for now, but it will be back. I can feel it moving within my stomach now. I won't let it win again. I'm going back to the cave, secluded from anyone else who I could hurt. Back to Carl. Back to where this thing came from. I'm sorry for the mess. On a laminated A4 sheet, there was a logo on the upper corners. Some kind of bird or something similar. But that wasn't what caught my attention the most. What really caught my attention was... God. What a nuisance. There was a hellish amount of text. Are you kidding me? How the hell did they manage to fit so much text into this thing? And here I was thinking Manuel knew how to write small and make use of space when taking surgery notes. Let's see. What does this thing say? In impeccable print, golden and ridiculously large letters headed the document. O Market Family Rules. Omni Market Branch. Night shift. What the hell? Rule number 1. During the night shift, all employees must be inside the facilities before the designated time. 10 p.m. Note: Joel recommends arriving 30 minutes before 10 p.m. What the hell? That is a very curious way of encouraging employees to arrive way earlier than the legal starting time. Rule number... I'm already bored. Yep, I'm definitely not planning to read all that. Could it be that the idiot who hired me gave me this thing as a joke? Because if it was a joke, well, yeah. It was pretty funny. I had to give him that. But if he thought I was going to swallow such an obvious troll and follow all those absurd rules, then the joke was on him. I wasn't going to do it. So I grabbed my bicycle and headed to the supermarket. I ended up arriving 10 minutes before my shift. One of the perks of being obsessed with punctuality, I guess. That means I followed rule number 1. So scary. Jokes aside, I walked through the automatic doors which announced my arrival with a cheerful ding-dong. The store was practically empty. There was only one person. The security guard, a pretty ordinary man. He didn't seem particularly fit, nor was he tall. That was a relief. I wouldn't want to run into someone intimidating. His name tag read, Joel. So this was the famous Joel mentioned in the ridiculous recommendations on the paper. Well, I was glad to know he was just the guard. If I did my job properly, I probably wouldn't have to interact with him much. I don't know why, but I got a bad feeling the moment I saw him. He looked like a jerk. Wait, thinking that about someone I didn't know made me the jerk, didn't it? Whatever. I walked over to him. It's better to know who you'll probably be spending so many hours with several times a week, and to find out whether he was mean or not. Hello, Mr. Joel. How are things going? Normal. By the way, just call me Joel. Ah, right, I almost forgot. They told me your uniform is in the back. The boss's? Yeah, let's say yes. An awkward silence followed. By the way, did you receive this? He pulled out the exact same laminated sheet I had. That thing? Yeah, I thought it was a joke. I folded it and stuffed it in my back pocket. Joel stared at me for a few seconds. Not at all. Read it. Sure. Good. Oh, and one more thing. Yeah? Don't enter or knock on the dairy room door. What? At least not today. Weirdo alert. Okay. Confirmed. The less I talked to this guy, the better. I headed towards the employee area to change. On the way, I couldn't help but notice how empty everything was. I understand it was a medium-sized supermarket, a little far from town. Not some huge hypermarket chain or anything like that. But even so, there were only 2 of us. That made the place feel much bigger than it really was, and also much quieter. It was the kind of silence that makes you think someone is watching you from somewhere. What a creepy feeling. Dang. I hope they're not recording me. I finished changing. A few minutes passed, then a few more, and more. My boredom eventually defeated my discomfort, so I went back to Joel. Quiet night, huh? Pretty much. It's usually like this on the shift. That's a good thing. You should be grateful, like I am. What? The day shift has worse rules. I laughed. Again with that? Do you seriously think those things are real? You don't believe them? He asked, tilting his head and scratching beneath his cap. Of course not. Come on, man. They're just jokes, right? I mean, yeah, I'll admit this all sounds suspiciously similar to those weird internet stories. But that's all they are. Internet stories. Joel remained silent. Could you come with me? Huh? Let's go to aisle 6. Why? Joel seemed to think about it for a few seconds. I can't think of a good reason. Because I'm your boss? He said it like a question. Why the hell did he say it like a question? What a weird guy. Wait, are security guards the bosses of cashiers? I had no idea. But I didn't want to make enemies on my first day. Fine, let's go. Good. We headed to aisle 6. During the walk I confirmed something. Joel was even stranger than I had imagined. It wasn't just because he barely talked. I wasn't exactly sociable either. It was something else. Something difficult to explain. I feel like he's a very apathetic person. Yeah, that was the word. He seemed incapable of caring about anything, as if absolutely everything meant the same to him. Eventually we arrived. Stand here. He positioned me in the middle of the aisle. So, you don't believe in this supermarket's rules, right? Not at all. Come on, don't tell me you do. Obviously not. I'm not an idiot. Oh, here, take this please. He tossed something at me. I caught it on reflex. A teddy bear? Wait, did you call me an idiot? Joel ignored me. He walked over to a shelf and grabbed a package of salt. Joel? He tore it open. Joel? He started pouring the salt onto the floor. He was drawing a circle around me. An uncomfortable knot formed in my stomach. What the hell are you doing? Joel answered without looking at me. Rule number 22. Avoid destroying any stuffed animals, especially the bears in aisle 6, after 10:30. Joel, what the hell? I already know you're an idiot incapable of following instructions. He finished closing the circle. And I also know you're skeptical. His voice remained completely flat, almost bored, while I was trapped in an entirely different world of confusion. But if you value your life even a little, or at least value not dying violently, and if you have a little consideration for me, since I'll be the one cleaning up your guts, you'll stay inside the salt circle. Huh? Then, without giving me any time to process what was happening, Joel pulled out a black knife with a green handle. He shoved it into my free hand and grabbed my wrist. Using my own arm, he drove the blade into the teddy bear's chest. What the hell? Are you crazy? Remember, don't leave the circle. I stepped back. God, I need to request a shift change. I'd quit, but I need the money to pay my student loans. Before I could continue thinking about how much I hated that guy, I heard a crack above my head, a dry sound, slow, like something splitting apart. I looked up. In the spotless white ceiling was a black crack, not black like a shadow, truly black, so black it seemed to devour the light around it. Joel, I think we should report that crack. The crack widened a few more inches. What the hell? The sound changed. It was no longer cracking. It was something wet and viscous. It reminded me of the sound of muscles separating during surgery. But it was coming from the ceiling. How was that possible? A chill ran up my spine from its base to the back of my neck. That didn't look like a crack. It looked like a wound, and it kept opening. More and more and more, until something gave way. The opening tore apart all at once. A cascade of black liquid fell directly onto me. Ugh! The impact made me stumble. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was the smell. It hit me a moment later. I gagged. It was an unbearable stench. A mixture of sewage, rotting meat, and chemicals. It felt like it was burning my nostrils. Drain water? That was my first thought, but it didn't make sense. There weren't pipes like that up there, right? Then I heard the sound. I froze. What was that groaning sound? Huh? The noise came again, louder. Did it come from above? It came from above, very high above. Slowly, very slowly, I looked up and my brain stopped working. I felt the air leave my lungs. God! The crack was no longer a crack. It was a huge hole, and inside it there was an eye. A gigantic eye. An eye? I took a step back on pure reflex. No, 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 no. That wasn't an eye. There had to be an explanation. It had to be an illusion. Some effect from the liquid and from not having eaten dinner before coming to work. Yeah, that was it. I just needed to look closer. The supposed sclera wasn't white. It was violet, and the iris? God, the iris looked like it was made of layers of impossible colors. Green, yellow, blue, red, all changing at the same time. Like a defective screen. That wasn't an eye. It couldn't be. But it blinked. I felt my heart stop. The iris moved. Left, right, up, down, and finally, toward me. Several seconds of silence passed before the pupil pulsed, releasing more liquid, and then contracted. Its color changed to a sickly shade, something similar to vomit. The entire surface of the eye began to distort. The colors spun, merged, warped, as if I were looking at something that didn't belong in this world. And then it screamed. It screamed. The sound was so brutal that I felt physical pain. My ears started ringing. What the hell is that thing? I wanted to run, get out of there, escape, but then I remembered Joel's words. Don't leave the circle. My gaze dropped to the floor and I noticed something impossible. The salt remained intact, completely dry. I was soaked. The floor was covered in that black substance, yet the line of salt remained perfect as though the liquid refused to touch it. I didn't have time to think further. The eye screamed again so loudly I thought my eardrums would burst. Something exploded inside the hole. A wet sound. Another wave of liquid poured down from above. I crouched instinctively. The black liquid never reached the circle. The moment it touched the salt, it simply vanished, evaporating as though it had struck an invisible wall. What? A strange man echoed from the ceiling. I looked up, and the eye was gone. Now it was a hand. A massive black hand attached to an arm that disappeared into the darkness of the hole. That thing seemed to be made of layer upon layer of twisted muscles that bled that black liquid whenever they writhed. The hand remained closed for several seconds. Then it began to open. First the pinky finger, and what was beneath the nail made me want to tear my own eyes out. A tongue. A two-colored tongue covered in eyes, covered with hundreds, thousands of tiny eyes. The tongue slithered toward me, dripping purple liquid, but it stopped. Then the ring finger opened. Instead of a nail, there was a pulsing cavity, like some sort of vulva. The rotten stench that came from it was so intense that my eyes watered. The index and middle fingers unfolded next. Both revealed more eyes, the same impossible eyes, spinning, watching, blinking, all at once. And then I saw the thumb. No, I don't want to describe it. Let's just say it was something so obscene and disgusting that I ended up vomiting. I collapsed to my knees. The retching doubled me over. Fortunately, not a single drop landed on the salt. The thing let out another moan, and finally opened its palm. The flesh split apart like a blooming flower. The joints cracked and a mouth appeared in the center. A gigantic mouth filled with deformed teeth, and in the middle, deep inside, an eye connected to a black mass like the lures of deep-sea fish. For a few seconds we stared at each other. It at me at it. The entire supermarket fell silent, and then it attacked. The mouth lunged forward, like a starving predator. No! I curled into myself, crouching in my own vomit, wailing to feel the teeth tear through me. But it never happened. I opened my eyes. The monstrosity had stopped, barely millimeters away from the salt line, drooling, shaking, desperate, unable to cross it. So, Joel was telling the truth. That thing was actually protecting me. What's happening? I looked around frantically and found Joel. He was sitting there reading a book. Reading a book. Help, Joel, please. Huh? He looked up. Oh, right. He turned a page. I'd forgotten you were there. I wanted to murder him. Seriously, I wanted to murder him. But before I could say anything, Joel sighed, cleared his throat, and shouted with an intensity completely at odds with his apathetic attitude. Oh my god, is that Beyonce? I froze. What? What the hell had he just said? The creature reacted instantly. The shriek it let out was horrifying. It sounded like a crying girl mixed with a pig being slaughtered. Its skin began to bristle. Bulges spread across its entire body. The muscles twisted beneath the surface. The thousands of eyes became bloodshot. Some started crying. Others simply exploded. The creature shuddered and then fled. Its entire arm melted into a bubbling mass. It retreated into the hole and disappeared, sealing the opening as though nothing had happened. The smell left behind was acidic, like laboratory chemicals. I collapsed to the floor, my knees giving out from fear. What the hell was that? Oh, that? Joel had finally stopped reading his stupid book and walked over to where I was. With a lazy movement of his foot, he erased the salt line and extended a hand toward me. Don't worry. I named the eldest one Amara. It seems that thing used to be a teenage girl who was in love with Beyonce. Turns out she was very shy. So that's a good way to scare her off when you screw up. How do you know that? Well, just 'cause. Just 'cause? That's all you're going to tell me? No. Well, yes. Actually, yes. That's all. His attitude made me forget all the fear I felt. My body kept shaking, but not from fear. From anger. I have an overwhelming urge to punch you. Go ahead. I blinked. What? But if you do, I'll take it as a formal acknowledgement that you understand something important. You're not in a normal place, and I don't want to spend overtime cleaning up your remains. Okay? Silence fell between us. You're a weirdo. Obviously. That empty smile returned. How do you think I've survived in this place with all those weird rules? I'm sure that was pretty obvious. Now I'm wondering, are you sure you're not an idiot? I thought about it for a few seconds. Then I sighed. Fine, I get it. It's all real. It's all dangerous. And this place is hell. I accept all of that. I just want to punch that empty smile off your face. Correct. Can I hit you now? Okie dokie. Joel spread his arms as though he were expecting a hug and closed his eyes. His expression said, "Give me your best shot." Curiously, at that moment, I was more annoyed with him than frightened by the infernal abomination that had almost devoured me because of him. So I threw the best right hook of my life. And I have to admit, it felt pretty good. Perfect. Joel rubbed his cheek. Your shift starts tomorrow, partner. Don't be late. You know, this time it's not just the usual motivational phrase. You really can't be late. Not even one day. For a second, I thought I saw something move between the lights. I swallowed hard. I ran a hand over my face, still covered in that black substance. I think I already regret accepting this job. There are certain aspects to human existence that, while essential to society, seem to beg no curiosity from outsiders, as a result operating out of sight and out of mind, like many little atlases working in tandem to prop the rest of us up on their shoulders. In most cases, you can chalk up this particular brand of disinterest to an occupation simply being mundane. The logistics of garbage removal or power line maintenance likely doesn't spark much intrigue in the mind of your average Joe. In other cases, though, a profession is ignored by the world at large not because it's boring, but because its mere existence is enough to elicit negative emotions of some kind. No field exemplifies this quality more than the grief industry. Everyone eventually has to engage with a business that deals in grief at some point in their life, but these brushes tend to get compartmentalized alongside the rest of the grieving process in people's heads. Your experience attending or booking a funeral is only clearly present in your mind as it's happening, quickly morphing into a blurry mess of a memory after everything is over and done with, as if you were in some sort of altered state of mind throughout the entire process. This effect has left the funeral industry sitting next to the uninteresting but essential category of enterprises we just spoke about, which is a shame, because the grief business is anything but uninteresting. As a third-generation funeral home proprietor, I feel qualified to speak on behalf of our industry to tell you some of the odd and noteworthy aspects of our trade. The things I'm about to share with you aren't exactly secrets. If you were to stop me or one of my kind on the street and ask us about the finer details of our craft, we wouldn't hesitate to share them with you. But by virtue of funerals being the tacit taboo that they are, these situations just never seem to occur, and the knowledge and stories never end up leaving our community. Perhaps the power of the internet will allow some of these vignettes to finally escape our little slice of humanity. When I was 12 years old, my dad, who had long been in charge of our family's business, began giving me some small responsibilities at our funeral home. No doubt setting in motion the process that would eventually lead to me taking over his role one day in the distant future. I was tasked with arranging flowers, printing memorial pamphlets and prayer cards, and various odd jobs that the few funeral attendants and assistants employed by the home were normally entrusted with, such as pulling weeds in the garden or cleaning the windows. Well, the funeral home had been in our family for about 60 years at that point, having been purchased by my grandfather in the 1940s. It had been in operation since 1912. Well, the rickety Edwardian building frequently gave me the creeps in my younger years. There's never been any reason to believe that the structure may be haunted in any capacity. No specters have ever been spotted wandering the narrow hallways, nor have any disembodied voices been heard calling out to lone workers burning the midnight oil. No, a potential haunting isn't necessary to make one feel a little unnerved in a place dedicated to housing and mourning the dead. But these heebie-jeebies felt by my younger self would fade over time. You'd be surprised how normal anything can feel if you're around it for enough time. Out of all the little obligations given to me by my father, my favorite one by far had been greeting guests, doing a job that involved not only working with adults, but also directing them in some manner gave me a sense of importance rarely felt by a 12-year-old, even if the extent of my power had simply been to tell guests which hallway they had to walk down. On one of these occasions, when I was entrusted with greeting the guests attending the day's funeral, something unexpected would happen. An event that would go on to have a permanent place in my mind as a light bulb memory. It was an unseasonably hot autumn day at the end of October. I was stationed a few meters away from the front door and guests had been streaming in at the usual pace. The short periods of downtime were split up by large groups and solo guests alike, passing through the threshold, and then waiting for me to tell them what they should do next. The guests themselves were dressed in varying levels of formality, as always. Everything from inappropriately flashy tuxedos to crassly casual t-shirts and jeans could be seen clothing the individuals walking into our home. But one thing would be consistent: everyone would be wearing black. While other cultures don different colors and periods of mourning, the standard in Western culture is black. Even if guests have different ideas of what formal wear is, they are generally pretty consistent when it comes to following this one rule. You will see the odd person strolling in wearing bright blue jeans, but even those individuals usually accompany it with a black shirt. On that particular day, though, somebody walked in wearing an outfit I had never seen before in a funeral setting. It was a lanky blonde man donning a fancy, well-tailored suit, every piece of it colored offensively bright red. I remember back then thinking it resembled how a stop sign might look at night, when a car's headlights reflected off of it, almost luminescent, drawing your eyes as if it were a grand neon light and you were some lowly insect. He walked up to me and began to speak with an odd cadence, as if English were not his first language, but at the same time, not making any perceptible mispronunciations or grammatical errors. He simply asked, "Where's the body?" I hesitated for a second, and then told him where to go. I wouldn't say I felt that unnerved. No more than usual, at least. We were used to getting all types walking through our doors. He began to slowly saunter the hallway leading to the viewing room, right as my father entered the front door. He began to talk about some minor gardening problem that required my attention, but abruptly stopped as his gaze shifted down the hallway towards the man in the red suit. The color seemed to immediately drain from his face, and his mouth hung wide open like an idiot. A knot began twisting in my stomach. It's disconcerting to see a parent bulk in obvious fear. After a brief moment of stillness, he uttered, "Oh God," under his breath, and took off down the hallway that leads into the staff-only part of the building. A few seconds later, he emerged from the viewing room, cutting the man in the red suit off. He was carrying a cup filled with a clear liquid, which he promptly threw in the man's face. The man instantly dropped to his knees and began groping his face in obvious pain, but he didn't emit any sound at all. My dad then shouted, "Code White," and soon, funeral attendants were rushing out of various doors into the narrow hallway. At this point, the man in the suit had risen back to his feet and was attempting to walk forward, but my dad bent down and leaned his shoulder into the man's chest, like a defensive football player. Some of the attendants came up behind the man to restrain him from the back, but my dad shouted for them to come around the front to help him push. Soon, there were 4 grown men hunched over, pushing this one person as if they were trying to get a car out of the mud. The man in the suit seemed to not pay any mind to the crowd of shoulders that were pressing into his abdomen. He was laser-focused on the viewing room and kept trying to move forward, despite being pushed back at an increasingly swift pace. Soon enough, the kerfuffle was nearing the front door. My dad yelled out, instructing me to open the door and then close it and lock it behind them once they got outside. I got up, my legs shaking from the adrenaline, and held the door open as if the attendants were merely carrying a coffin or some other heavy thing outside. As they neared the threshold, the man in the suit grew more frantic, breathing heavily and moving erratically. Soon they were fully out of the building, as I did as I was told and locked the door. A few seconds later I heard the lock jiggling, followed by my dad and the attendants walking in. The man in the suit, nowhere to be found. Everybody began walking off in different directions. Whatever had just transpired was seemingly over. I ran up and grabbed my dad to ask him what the hell had just happened, but he responded dismissively, telling me, "We'll talk about it when you're older." The day then progressed as if the man in the suit had never showed up. The commotion was upsetting enough, but that wasn't what forever cemented this event in my head. No, that would be the reactions from the other guests. You see, the viewing was in progress the entire time this was happening. Multiple guests were loitering in the front entrance area and walking up and down the hallways, yet not a single one showed any visible reaction to the madness unfolding before them. They didn't fully ignore it. I spotted at least a couple of them looking at the struggle, but they glanced at it in the same manner. One might point their eyes towards a clock on the wall, as if what they were seeing wasn't the tiniest bit out of place. Many years later, as I grew older and my responsibilities in our family business increased, my father would explain what had occurred that day. This was apparently a semi-common occurrence, not just at our funeral home either. Well, there was no documented history or information about these unwanted visitors, as they're commonly called. An oral history can be uncovered if you speak to the right people at FSAC or other such funeral service trade shows. These unwanted visitors typically stroll in wearing some sort of inappropriate color. In the West, they usually appear in either bright red or white, but my father told me he once spoke to a Chinese funeral director who encountered a visitor wearing pitch black attire in his home country, where white is the traditional color for funeral wear. Once inside, their only goal appears to be finding the recently departed lying in their casket. They've been known to string together simple sentences to aid in their search, but nothing more. If one tries to lead a conversation with one of these visitors, they'll simply respond with blank stares. Sometimes, though, no communication is needed, and they can find their way to the viewing area on their own. Usually, someone intervenes before they manage to find the deceased, but if no one does, they'll stop just before the casket and turn their head downward to observe it, much like any other mourner. After a moment, they'll start to sniffle, which soon turns into a whimper, followed by a cry, a sob, and finally, an ear-piercing wail. Neither my father nor I have ever encountered anyone who's experienced this firsthand, but the second-hand accounts we've heard say this wail very much resembles the desperate cry of an agitated newborn. That's where our knowledge stops, supposedly, and again keep in mind that this is all unverified second-hand info. Everyone who's experienced a visitor wailing seems to experience a momentary lapse in memory. When their awareness returns, the visitor is no longer there. According to these admittedly unreliable sources, in every reported case of a visitor wailing, a member of the funeral party present will end up dying in their sleep the following night. The medical causes for these deaths are supposedly inconsistent, the only commonality between them being that they all occurred when the victim was experiencing a period of deep REM sleep. It's more than likely this is merely a dash of urban legend sprinkled on top of a very real phenomena. But I'm not going to be the first death care professional to play Mythbuster with a potentially dangerous situation like this. I've experienced a grand total of 2 unwanted visitors in my life, one when I was 12 and a second when I was 27. I hadn't yet taken over the business at that point, but I'd long been fully shaped for the role by my father, and I was able to take his place when dealing with the intruder the second time around. After we got him outside, and a very startled administrative assistant had locked the door behind us, the visitor stopped resisting and just walked off around the corner of the building. I ran after him, but upon turning the corner myself, I couldn't find any trace of him. I walked back inside, determined this time to speak to some guests and hopefully understand why they once again didn't react at all during that brief period of pandemonium. Every single one I spoke to said the same thing in different words. Give him a break. He's grieving. I'm not entirely sure what mechanism could make rational run-of-the-mill people so dismissively unaware of something so aggressively unusual playing out in front of their eyes. But when you've been in this business as long as I have, you come to learn that groups of people grieving together can act highly unusual themselves. I've heard it described in many ways, but personally, I like to think of funerals as having a sort of miasma hanging over them, an unseen cloud being breathed in by each and every funeral goer, making them all act in ways they otherwise wouldn't. Take an Irish wake, for example. In our corner of Canada, we tend to host these fairly frequently, and they all follow the same pattern. The family and friends of the deceased will arrive slowly over the first couple of hours, during which the activity of the group seems to be intense sobbing by every attendee, only being intensified as each member of the party pays their respects to the deceased. Imagine everyone you've ever known all together in a room crying uncontrollably at the same time. Slowly, though, as people who haven't seen each other in years stop wailing long enough to start conversating with one another, and as copious amounts of alcohol get passed around, the sobs slowly morph into laughs, and suddenly the whole event turns into a howling drunken party, all with a corpse lying in the middle of it. It's said that the Irish method is one of the healthiest ways of grieving, and perhaps that's true, because the oddities I've observed in conventional North American funeral viewings are far more bizarre. It's a somewhat common occurrence in the funeral viewings we host for a guest to freeze. It always starts with a person's movements gradually slowing, almost like a video clip that's been stretched out. Their eyes will start gyrating in an unnatural, erratic manner, not keeping pace with the body's declining tempo. This will go on until the affected individual becomes fully stuck in place. Their eyes stop gyrating, with the pupils rolling back and only the whites showing. A sufferer may be stationary at this point, but they may not be still. I've had employees tell me stories of freezing incidents in which an affected guest appears to be finely vibrating at a high intensity, almost like a mechanical toothbrush or a massage gun. While this might seem like some sort of extreme medical emergency, it happens to the complete indifference of the other funeral goers. And indeed, this whole situation can be resolved by an attendant simply walking up and shaking the affected person by the shoulders, as if they were waking them up. A situation that's much more difficult to deal with, however, is something we call a Wernicke's eulogy. It's not terribly uncommon for the person reading out a eulogy to occasionally stumble or falter. Not everyone is accustomed to public speaking after all, but very rarely. These mistakes will become more frequent, increasing until the speaker is confidently reciting complete and utter nonsense. This will be received by the rest of the guests as if it were a perfectly normal eulogy, and I've seen some guests start to join in with the speaker, muttering the same absurdities under their breath, much like a partitioner following along in a prayer. It's a relatively harmless thing, but it's notoriously difficult to deal with. An individual reading out a Wernicke's eulogy will not stop. They'll just keep going and going to an audience that doesn't seem to notice the time passing. If you attempt to stop them, the other guests will get upset, acting as if you needlessly put an end to a normal, heartfelt eulogy for their loved one. Because of this, funeral homes have to get creative when dealing with this problem. The most common practice is to set off the fire alarm. The loud, shrieking sirens, combined with everyone being rushed outside, is generally enough of a shock to the senses to break whatever mass trance was holding the guests. I've heard long-winded rants from those in my industry who have an affinity for mysticism about how these sorts of phenomena are supposedly due to the veil that holds our reality together, being at its thinnest in places and situations where life and death meet, and that these oddities are merely natural human reactions to a heightened metaphysical environment. Personally, I'm a little more skeptical. I think the explanation is much simpler. Grief is a very complicated and poorly understood process. I believe it hijacks the mind in a more extreme way than is commonly thought. I'm not sure anybody can completely grasp the concept of a person ceasing to exist. Every society on Earth is built around some religious framework that goes to great lengths to explain how death isn't actually an end, but rather just a change of some sort. Put a bunch of people in a room together who are all being faced with this impossible reality, and of course they're going to behave strangely. If you're reading this and rolling your eyes, assuming I'm making it all up because you yourself have attended a funeral and saw nothing amiss, that's undoubtedly because you were under the same spell as your fellow guests. To really see those oddities in action, you have to be an independent observer, watching a funeral progress from the outside, but this is an exceedingly rare position to be in. Grief is such a powerful thing that we're exceedingly wary of it, even when it's being experienced by others. It's sadly common for individuals to lose friends because grief made them into a sort of leper. That's how powerfully repulsed we are by it, at least in normal situations. What I'm about to tell you is a bit of a taboo in our profession. It's something that's known to most but acknowledged by none. I believe it's a perfectly natural phenomena, but one that's incredibly difficult to come to terms with. Perhaps as difficult as grief itself. As long as people have been dying, so too have they been practicing funeral rites. Even before they were fully human, 240,000 years ago, the Homo naledi, our distant ancestors, would bury their dead deep within the twisting passageways of the Rising Star cave system in modern-day South Africa. They would explore the darkest reaches of these caverns until they found an optimal human-sized slot in the wall that could serve as the permanent resting place for their deceased loved ones, above which they would etch various ritualistic symbols. They had to creatively place fires and use makeshift torches to make their way to these extremely hard-to-reach burial spots, an early indication of how much distance we prefer to have between us and grief. Many epochs later, ancient Egypt would present humanity with its first iteration of a funeral home. Just like today, they served to accommodate the complex and strange rituals people wanted acted out before they buried their loved one and moved on with their life. Just like Homo naledi, the ancient Egyptians kept these morbid activities of death relegated to the underground, with all known ancient Egyptian funeral workshops being found deep beneath the earth. While history's first morticians were toiling away in dark subterranean chambers to chart the way for the rest of us, the earliest known example of a disturbing unnamed human phenomena would be recorded. 1,323 years before the Common Era, Egypt's most famous pharaoh, Tutankhamun, would die at the age of 18. His reign was brief and uneventful. By all measures, he was a fairly insignificant leader of the new kingdom. His modern fame isn't a result of anything that happened during his short life, but rather what happened after his death. While most tombs of pharaohs were raided by grave robbers, and subsequently left dilapidated and incomplete, Tutankhamun's tomb was pristine and untouched by a time when British archaeologists first came across it 100 years ago. Much of what we know about the funerary traditions of ancient Egypt is because of discoveries made in Tutankhamun's tomb. We know that his coffin was brought across the Nile while weeping commoners watched. We know that oxen pulled his furniture while his sarcophagus was carried into the Valley of the Kings by 12 men, adorned in fine white robes. We also know something else. The sobbing onlookers watching the procession across the Nile is a common point of history, but what isn't discussed nearly as much is what happened after. The mourners were likely arranged as part of the funeral, but once the coffin had fully crossed the river, many of the onlookers jumped into the wide body of water and tried to swim across. Many drowned, but some successfully made it to the other side, where they kept following the procession all the way to the mouth of the underground necropolis. As the cortege made its way into the passageway, the frantic convoy of peasants tried to follow them into it, having to be physically held off by guards. You could explain this situation by assuming these people simply held a deep affection for their deceased leader, but there's reason to believe this isn't the case. Throughout history, and into the modern day, you can find examples of regular people being insatiably attracted to funerals, watching them in the same way a cat might stare at a flock of birds from a windowsill. It tends to come and go in waves, almost like a fashion trend. You won't see it happen for years, and then suddenly, it'll be happening every day. This phenomena has no name. It's something never discussed by my kind, but anyone who's been in this business for more than a few years has likely seen it rear its head. For most of my life, I had never even heard of it, but that would change in 2020. Suddenly, the numbers of guests would start increasing dramatically at every funeral we put on. At first, I thought it was because we were in the middle of COVID, and people just wanted a reason to get out of the house. But then I started noticing onlookers standing outside the graveyard, watching bodies being lowered into the ground. Some of them had binoculars. Others were filming with their smartphones. Eventually, visitors began filming entire funerals with their phones. They'd walk up to the coffin to take selfies with the deceased, something I had never seen happen before. At one point, we instituted a no-camera policy, but visitors would keep taking pictures and videos anyway, just more sneakily. Some funerals would have lines out the door, often to the great surprise of the family who had organized it. Most of these guests wouldn't have a good answer when you asked them how they knew the deceased, and they'd have even worse answers when you asked them why they were there. By the end of 2020, our business began to function more like an art gallery than a funeral home. We had no idea how to stop it. The mourners would always be greatly outnumbered by the spectators, who were inexplicably and ferociously drawn to the whole process. I began to feel like we were acting out artists on the river Ganges for amused Western tourists. In one particularly dark moment, I even considered soliciting donations from them. Instead, we began screening guests before they arrived. It was easy to discern legitimate visitors from the funeral enthusiasts, who were promptly turned away. We had to hire 2 security guards, who would also accompany funeral processions to the cemetery to fend off these onlookers, as if they were paparazzi. It seemed to have solved the existing problems, but new ones would pop up. Break-ins became a frequent occurrence, made all the more disturbing when nothing was ever found missing. We ended up putting up bars on all the windows and replacing our doors with reinforced security doors. Perhaps the thing that unnerved me the most, however, was what I found online one day while checking our company's social media page. We got a request to be tagged in someone's post. It contained a grainy, low-quality photo of a coffin being lowered into the ground. It took a second to register, but I recognized the funeral party. It was one we accommodated. I clicked on their profile and was greeted with an endless gallery of photos and videos of funerals and funeral homes. I was shocked. I had assumed this was only happening to us, but this person seemed to frequent many other such establishments. This appeared to me like the profile of a disturbed individual, the sort that usually posts to a non-existent audience, but that wasn't the case here. Every photo I clicked on had hundreds, or even thousands of likes, with many comments discussing the finer points of whatever funeral-related thing was depicted in the photo or video. I tried clicking on the profiles of some of these commenters, and each led me to a similar page that also contained countless posts about funerals and funeral homes. Some of them were filming funeral vlogs, little 30-second vertical videos depicting the account holder visiting several funerals in one day. Others were showing off their collections of memorial pamphlets and other such funeral memorabilia. I spent a good few hours going down this rabbit hole. I found several voyeur snapshots of our own funeral homes among the endless photos and videos. There was something primally revolting about the whole thing, like it was breaking some unspoken code of human behavior, almost alien-like. I decided to attend OACFP that year. a small trade show aimed towards death care professionals hosted in my native Ottawa. I wanted to see how others had been dealing with this bizarre new interest in funerals the general public seemed to be fostering. To my disappointment, though, nobody seemed to want to talk about it. Every person I asked either changed the subject immediately or stopped talking to me altogether. The convention was hosted at the Brook Street Hotel, which has a large jazz bar just a few meters away from the convention hall doors. I decided to visit it late that night to see if I could buddy up to a convention attendee while they were a few drinks deep, and then bring up the subject while their guard was down. Luckily, I came across a group of 4 people, all draped in lanyards, who had obviously come from across the hall. I sat with them, and we began talking. They told me they hadn't known each other previously. All of them were funeral home proprietors who had met at the convention earlier that day. When the conversation hit a natural silent point, I felt it was a good time to bring up the subject of funeral enthusiasts. The silence then continued. Eventually, though, one of them began to speak. He was an older gentleman who ran a funeral home in Kingston. Unfortunately, much of what he said was information that I had already gathered by being in the middle of this phenomenon myself. There was, however, one thing he mentioned that I did not know. There's a pattern that can be found as to when this trend of funeral enthusiasts seems to pop up. Every single recorded instance appears to occur during periods of mass death. War, plagues, natural disasters. Every time people started uncontrollably flocking to funerals, it either preceded or happened during a time of great tragedy in humanity. When I returned home that night, I consulted my research to see if there was any substance to this theory. Sure enough, Tutankhamun died just 1 year before the onset of the Hittite plague, which would ravage Egypt and the rest of the ancient world. A medieval case in France I found, which had originally been labeled as an example of mass hysteria, occurred the same year the Black Death reached Europe. I then opened the CBC app on my phone and saw a headline that said the COVID death toll had reached 2 million. After reading all of this back, I'm not even sure why I'm sharing this with you. Maybe I'm just in need of somebody who's willing to listen to all this morbid talk of death and grief that seems to make its way into every facet of my life. Like people who are grieving, those of us who work in the death care industry tend to be isolated from the social fabric that weaves the rest of you together. The business of grief can be lucrative, but it's monetizing the worst period of your life. Telling someone you run a funeral home gives them the same feeling as telling them you're a divorce attorney or a payday loan officer, even if I'm adamant that we truly are helping people. The funeral enthusiasts began to peter out in 2023 as COVID died down. I was glad to see it stop and for things to go back to normal, but a tiny sliver of me deep down felt a little sad to see the only legitimate fans of what we do go away. Maybe I'm just chasing after a taste of that attention again, as depraved as that might sound. In any event, if you're still reading this, then you were at least interested enough to make it all the way to the end of my gloomy little rants. And if that's the case, then there's at least one person out there who cared enough to listen, and for that I'm truly grateful. Thank you. Someone brought a camera into work recently. He was likely a homeless man who found it lying around and figured he could get a pretty penny for it. For being 10 years old, it was in decent shape. So, we agreed I'd pay $30 for it. While taking it apart, I realized the SD card had never been removed. It didn't seem out of the ordinary, but it was enough to spark my curiosity. You see, I'd like to believe that I'm the type of guy to keep my head down and stay out of people's personal lives, but business has been slow recently. I have to keep my mind occupied somehow, don't I? One night, I plugged it into my laptop and was quite taken aback by what I had found. Hundreds, If not thousands of videos were on this thing. Not just any videos. They were vlogs, like a diary someone had kept up to date for the past 6 years. I clicked on the first clip, like anyone would, and quickly found out that this camera belonged to a young woman. She didn't look any older than 19. She had blonde curly hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that radiated innocence and kindness. She had a factor that made her addictive through the screen. It wasn't just her face or her voice. There was something else that made it nearly impossible for me to look away. For the next 3 weeks, I would watch her recordings daily. It was like a TV show that kept you wanting more at the end of every episode. Every evening I'd close the shop, crack open a beer, and watch for hours while she talked about her life in medical school, this guy she found cute, and her hobbies as a painter. I felt guilty though. I wouldn't get home until almost 11 o'clock. By that time, my wife had already gone to bed. One night she prepared a nice meal with candles and everything, but by the time I was home, everything was cold and the candles had burnt out. It was our 10-year anniversary. Oh well. As I kept watching, things became odd. What started off as innocent vlogs turned into footage of yelling and screaming. It was like she was arguing with somebody, except nobody was in the room with her. In one video, she just sat in her dorm filming herself crying for over an hour, followed by footage of her laughing like nothing had happened. Her smile seemed a bit different, maybe a bit wider than usual. I couldn't put my finger on it. I no longer felt the warmth and innocence I felt before. It almost seemed forced or performed. But performed for who? It was just her, alone in her room. But what if it wasn't? What if she wasn't alone? I felt bad. I felt invasive. I felt possessive. But I couldn't stop. The videos gradually kept getting darker and more strange. In some of the footage, she would walk around her dorm covering the mirrors with white towels. She would also film herself painting. It was the same portrait of the same person in every video, but with minor tweaks. There were times I questioned if any of this was even real. There were times it got disturbing. In one piece of footage, she grabbed her curls and stretched them behind her head as far as she could before pinning the skin in place with tacks. My stomach turned as she forcefully inserted the sharp needles into her head, her hands shaking aggressively. I questioned whether I should contact the police or whether this was all just some sick prank. I kept watching anyway. At this point, there were now dozens of portraits scattered throughout her room. I watched while she crawled around, looking through them frantically, like she was searching for an image that didn't exist. She started yelling. I tried to make out what she was saying until... that was it. The video had ended. I tried to click to the next piece of footage, but that was the last one. I pulled out the card and reinserted it, hoping it would give me more. Desperately, I went back to the first video. My chest tightened so hard I forgot how to breathe. Over time, she changed. Not in a gradual way. Not in a natural way. Even early on, there were faint markings on her face. Measurements for something. Her teeth became straighter. Too straight. Sharper. Her cheeks sunk into her skull, folding over one another while she forced a smile. I wanted more. This couldn't be the end. I began searching online profiles that matched her image. I would sit for hours looking through student directories, social media profiles, and missing persons cases. The blue light of my laptop began burning my eyes, but I kept going. I searched for names, numbers, dates, schools, everything. I found nothing. It started consuming me. I stopped eating. I forgot about my family. I forgot about my store. I had to find this girl. I noticed my appearance in the reflection of the shop window. I was paler. My cheeks were sharper, sinking into my face like hers had. I could even see blue veins peeking through my forehead. My eyes seemed deeper into my skull. My body was gray. A familiar gray. It doesn't matter. It was all probably just in my head. I needed to focus on finding her. I was sitting in my room. I stood the old camera on my desk. The blonde wig sat awkwardly on my head. Not perfect, but close enough. My name is... I paused for a moment. What was my name again? I heard a faint call from upstairs. It was my wife. I ignored her. Anyway, I said to the camera. The red recording light blinked almost like it was in sync with my heartbeat. Today was my first day of medical school. My reflection in the bathroom mirror stole my wife 3 days ago. I know how that sounds. If someone else posted those words, I'd assume they were insane. But before you decide if I'm crazy or not, let me tell you what happened. I'd been standing in the bathroom admiring the progress in my weight loss journey. 30 pounds gone. My torso looked tighter, my shoulders broader. Everything was looking good. Maybe not my face. I had a strange look. I remember thinking it was judgmental. Not what I thought my normal face looked like. It was more like I was looking down at someone. Anyway, just then my wife came into the bathroom behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. She told me I looked good. She started kissing my neck and running her hands slowly up my thigh. She started guiding me toward the bedroom. Before I followed her, I turned back to turn off the bathroom light and glanced back at the mirror. My reflection was screaming. Its mouth stretched wide, eyes bulged and angry, fist pounding against the glass. There was no sound, just the reflection trying to rip through the mirror. I closed my eyes and shook my head real fast, trying to rattle something loose in my brain. I opened my eyes again. The reflection was normal. I laughed it off. Blood wasn't exactly flowing to my brain at the moment. I turned off the light and closed the bathroom door. The next morning, I nearly died trying to shave. I still shaved the old-fashioned way, scalding hot water in the sink, a brush with cream and a straight razor. When I finished, I leaned down to rinse my face. Suddenly my head slammed into the sink. Scalding water flooded my eyes. I tried to pull back, but something forced me down. The underside of the faucet smashed into the back of my head. The air escaped my lungs in an underwater scream. Panic exploded through me. I crawled blindly through the water until I found the drain stopper and yanked it free. The water finally began to drain. I staggered backward, gasping for air. My face felt like it was on fire. The mirror above the sink was fogged from steam, but through the haze, I could have sworn my reflection was smirking, like it knew exactly what had happened. I splashed cold water from the faucet on my burning face and eyes and looked up at the mirror again. The expression on my reflection was gone. It was just me. It had been my imagination. Or that's what I kept telling myself anyway. Later that afternoon, I decided to prove it. I locked myself in the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. The reflection looked immediately angry. It wasn't me, though. It was the thing in the mirror. Its face wasn't burned like mine, which was red and blistered. Then it raised its hand and gave me the middle finger. I froze. The reflection started shouting and gesturing like it wanted to fight. Still no sound, just a pissed-off version of me. So in typical angry me fashion, I returned the gesture, flipping it off. That was not a good idea. Its face filled with rage. It began slamming its fists against the inside of the mirror. Crack. A spiderweb of fractures exploded across the glass. At the same instant, pain shot through my hand. I looked down. My hand was balled into a tight fist. Blood dripped from my knuckles. When I looked back up, there was a bloody smear across the mirror. The thing behind the glass held up its hands. They were clean. No blood. I don't remember deciding to remove the mirror. I just remember running to the garage for tools. When I returned, the reflection looked afraid. It pressed its face against the glass, desperately watching me unscrew the mounting bolts. It hammered against the inside harder and harder, creating new cracks. I finally removed the last bolt. The mirror came free. The reflection screamed silently as I carried it outside. I threw it into the dumpster. The glass, and the reflection with it, shattered. For a few days, we went without a mirror. My wife hated it. Eventually, she convinced me to install a new one, which I finally did a couple of days ago. I never told her why I'd gotten rid of the first mirror. Who would believe me? Hell, I barely believed myself. This morning, after my workout, I found myself standing in front of the new mirror, admiring my progress. The exact same thing I had been doing when this all started. This time, however, my face carried a bit of disappointment from all that had happened, not to mention the pain from the burns. My wife walked into the bathroom. I saw her reflection before I felt her touch. Her hand slid around my waist. Her lips brushed my neck. I smiled. Then something felt wrong. I turned around. The bathroom was empty. My wife wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I looked back at the mirror. Inside it, my wife was still kissing me. My reflection turned and smiled. The two of them began walking toward the bedroom. I started screaming, banging on the glass, yelling at them to stop. My reflection reached back toward the bathroom door, toward the side of the mirror I was standing on. It switched off the light and closed the door behind it, leaving me standing alone in the dark. An odd man gave me a strange gift. It is a box that I can't open. I was walking to the subway station. It was raining, which hadn't been foretold on the Weather Channel, so I plastered a stolen newspaper over my head. I looked down towards the wet pavement and away from the onslaught so that my glasses would stay dry. This didn't work. The water was sliding down my forehead and dripping off of my cheeks. There was a jingling sound. Rattle, rattle. Several coins bounced around a paper cup. I didn't look up. I just patted my pants pocket as if to say, nothing here, and kept moving. "You've got $8.75, the man shouted. His voice boomed above the sound of the downpour. Yes, I had exactly that. That's twice the subway fare, I thought. 4 loonies and a quarter multiplied by 2 trips. It was a smart trick. I wondered, though, how he knew I was carrying an extra quarter. I'd brought it for the shopping cart at the supermarket, where I'd stop after work. "You have something for me," he cooed. His gimmick had stopped me, and now, well, I was stood still. He stepped in front of me. His grin showed his horse's teeth, yellowed and jutting outward. He had a nose like an eagle's beak, curved, sloped into a drooping point. His ears stuck out and sagged like a crow's, and his long neck arched like a swan's. He had flaming orange hair that, where it had become damp from the rain, faded into a murky copper color. He was a very ugly man. "I'm sorry. I need it," I said. I peered at him from above the frames of my glasses. My eyes were cautious. I tried not to portray my frustration. The newspaper flapped angrily as the wind picked up speed. I moved to continue my path. Splash. The sole of my rubber boot slapping against a cloudy puddle. "I've got something for you." I paused again. His smile was wider, toothier, and the golden caps that decorated his molars peeked around the corners of his upturned mouth. He spun and stooped down to his sleeping place. His bed was a rain-soaked and sun-bleached blanket. On it there was a scattering of items. Sodden strips of cardboard, a dirty yellow bucket full up with water, an assortment of pens, pencils, and markers. A folded gray jumper served as a pillow. There was one more thing. A large box made of wood. He scooped it up and thrust the heavy trunk into my chest and, wanting not for it to crash down onto my flimsy shoes, should he let go. I gripped it firmly with both hands. I watched as the newspaper was ripped away by the tempest, thrashing about in the air, flashing the words Toronto Star at me before disappearing behind the fog. Don't look inside. Keep the lid shut. I don't want this. I can't take it on the train. I stammered, and I looked up towards him, but he wasn't there. My head swiveled left and right. I couldn't spot him, but I could feel that the ugly man's gaze was on me, his figure obscured by the sheet of falling water. My glasses were of no use, streaked with rain. Crack. A thunderclap sounded, and a bolt of lightning illuminated the street, so I broke out in a run for the metro without another word. I was at the turnstile. I tried to fetch the fare that was tucked in my pocket. I couldn't reach it, I realized, because my hands were full with the box. A curt "hello" attracted the attention of the ticket inspector, and I passed the chest to him as I slotted the change into the machine. Clink, clink. The gate opened. For a moment, a few seconds at least, I thought I might leave the box with the attendant. The wet trunk had begun to soak his crisp white shirt sleeves. He gazed at it intently, his face revealing a mixture of confusion and interest. He was inspecting it in more depth than I had, and I became curious of it myself, so I snatched it back from him. I stepped onto the platform and didn't meet his eye as he watched me depart. While I sat on the train, I tried not to stare at the obtuse, cumbersome thing. I thought that the less attention it received from me, the less it would receive from other nosy commuters. I glanced around at the weary expressions worn by the train car's passengers, explained by a quick check of my digital watch. 7:34 a.m. Some of their tired eyes twitched towards my box. My head had begun to ache. I was clenching my jaw. I watched the dreary cityscape slide by as the train surfaced. The wet window concealed the finer details, but I was familiar with the view. This was my usual route, of course. Slick concrete littered with colorful graffiti filled the foreground. Mirrored high-rises spiraled towards plump, rain-filled clouds and echoed the harsh gray of the overcast sky. Lake Ontario could be glimpsed where a crumbling brick wall had been hastily replaced by a chain-link fence. Without the sun to illuminate its rippling waters, the Great Lake resembled a slab of smooth stone. The window was consumed by darkness as the subway dipped back beneath the street. Reflected in the black glass was me, my box, and the man who had silently taken his place next to me. "I'll take that from you," he said to me. His voice was a low grumble. He was a large man. His hulking figure occupied 1.5 seats, and though one sat vacant to his right, his bulk encroached upon my space. He dwarfed me in height. Where I was a measly 5 feet and 4 inches, his sturdy frame surely exceeded 6 feet. I tore my eyes from his reflection and did not look at him. I shook my head. No. "Please?" He stretched a thick, meaty hand towards the box, caressing the damp wood. I slapped it away. "Mine." As he recoiled, I rose from the bench. The metal doors creaked open shortly after I stood. I scurried off the train, several stops before my own, to thwart the would-be thief. I walked the rest of the way to work, 1/2 of a mile pelted by the steady downpour. My rubber boots squelched on the elevator's carpeted floor. Drip, drip. Water slid off of my drenched suit jacket and trickled onto the rug. I pressed 9 with my elbow. I had a meeting, some hubbub about an upcoming project, but I wanted to visit my office first. Numbers flashed on a red 7-segment display as the elevator rose slowly. 1, 2, 3, and then the elevator stopped. The door slid open. There was a scoff. "Gee, look at you," Deuce said. He lifted his arm to his face, covering his mouth, and disguised his mocking laughter as a cough. I couldn't stand Deuce. I did not offer any pleasantries in response. He gripped his suitcase firmly and entered the elevator without another word, though I could see the edge of his lips tightening into a smirk. His boss, Helen, stood behind him. Her gaze was fixated on him, a scowl forming on her face. She nodded to me in greeting. I nodded back. The elevator began up, 6 floors until mine. But just 2 floors had passed when I began to feel uneasy. Deuce and Helen's eyes were on me. I could feel it. On my box. I squeezed the chest so tightly that a wooden splinter lodged in my pointer finger. It burned red. Painful. Ouch. To protect me and to protect my box, I turned around. I tucked my head and huddled around the trunk. I stared at the blank metal panels that decorated the elevator walls and the thin black seam between them where they met in the corner. The two shifted. They shuffled their feet, and their heads turned to me, but I shielded the box with my shivering body. 6, 7, 8, and then 9. I sprinted into my office. I locked the door. I pulled the blinds shut and turned the lights off. I closed the curtains on the window that overlooked the city. I sat at the desk, the old chair groaning beneath our weight, and really looked at the box for the first time. It was wood, yes, but what kind I couldn't know. As the rain had changed the color and texture of the grain, there were 2 leather straps with brass knuckles that secured the lid. The edges were worn and faded, the uncured hide visible through the cracks. There were 2 zip ties, made of ribbed white plastic. There were many elastic bands wrapped around the box, 100 or more thin strips of tan rubber. There was a very, very small lock on the box's golden clasp. It was no bigger than the tip of my pinky finger. This strange gift is a box that I shouldn't open. He told me, do not open it. But what was inside? When I rattled the chest, there was no sound. It sounded empty. Was nothing inside? Why had the man given it away so eagerly? Why had everyone wanted it so badly? I wanted to know. I had to know. In this box, what was there? I undid the metal fasteners and removed the strips of leather. I turned them over in my hands, and on the soft back, they had been branded with 1 word each. The first read, greed. The second read, envy. I tossed them in the plastic wastebasket. Then I plucked them back out and stuffed them in the locked desk drawer so nobody else would find them. I took a pair of scissors to the cable ties. They had text too. Black permanent marker had inscribed on them, hunger and yearning. They went into the drawer too. I used the scissors again on the rubber bands. I could have stretched them around the box, one by one, but I needed to know what was inside of it. I needed to know now. As they shrunk back into tiny fragments of stretchy cord, they made a noise which, if I were crazy, I would say sounded like the word curiosity. But I'm not crazy, so it sounded like elastic bands breaking. Their remnants went into the drawer. I stuffed a bent paper clip into the tiny lock. I wiggled it around, jammed it in there, stabbed at the mechanism wildly. It didn't work. I turned the box onto its side and picked up my metal stapler. I slammed it down and down and down again onto the little lock. I held it in place with my left hand, pinching it between my splintered finger and my sweaty thumb. I brought the stapler down again. I brought it down on my thumb. Foolishness, I cursed beneath my breath. But the lock had sprung open. I threw it into the drawer so quickly that it nearly bounced out. I righted the box and wenched the lid apart. Creak. The hinges squealed. I was vibrating with excitement, my teeth chattering when I peered inside. There was emptiness. There was certainly nothing at all. I reached into the box, thrashing my hand about, and grasped at the lack of anything. But there was something. There was a word engraved in the bottom of the box. I traced it carefully with my finger, felt each letter, searched for more on the 4 walls and on the top, but there was just one. Hope, it said. $10,000 for pulling teeth. That was the job description. I don't think the words even registered before I clicked accept. I saw the pay and booked the gig as fast as my thumb could move. Within minutes, I was in my mom's pickup, heading out towards the address listed in the app. The infamous side gigs app, the latest craze in the gig economy. We've come to know and love. The jobs aren't always as weird and cryptic as this one, but the tame ones don't pay as well either. When I first signed up, I started with conventional stuff: food delivery, taxi service, amateur landscaping. Not a lot of effort if you're willing to accept minimal pay. But if you really want to make a living, you gotta scroll all the way to the bottom. That's where the good stuff lives. The odd jobs. The jobs that pay well because nobody is willing to do them. Now, it's not what you think. The app does its best to filter out the sexual stuff. The jobs are just odd. The first one I took had a heading that read, "Big pile of rocks need moving." No other details. $500 offer. $500 to move rocks? I could hardly believe it. The address alone was enough to scare off a casual browser. I showed up to a dusty trailer park with a wheelbarrow and some gloves in the back of my car. I thought I'd be met with some pet project. A new driveway, perhaps. Nope. A fidgety man with 2 teeth greeted me in dusty blue overalls. He packed his lip and pointed to the pile of boulders in his front lawn. Said I just needed to move them to the back. When I asked where, he simply replied, "Wherever," before hobbling back inside. I didn't understand, but I obliged. The job took about an hour. I offered to do more, but the man refused. He tossed me a stack of bills and waved me off. I sat in the truck in silence. The money felt heavy in my hand as I tried to make sense of what I'd just done. Just when I thought it couldn't get any stranger, the man came back out of his house. He must have thought I already left. Probably best he didn't see me lingering. I pulled out slow as he walked in a hurry to the back of his trailer. He approached the new pile of rubble and began carrying one of the boulders back to the same spot I moved it from. I couldn't believe it. What was the point? Why pay so much to move the pile? Did he just like watching dudes carry rocks to his backyard? I spent the whole drive home turning it over in my head and came up with nothing. Some jobs don't make sense. I learned to live with that. I didn't fret over this interaction for long. I took another job after that made me forget all about it. A woman paid me to come name her kittens. She claimed she made a deal with an entity a long time ago that would lay waste to all that she claimed in exchange for some heroin, having someone else name her belongings as a way to circumvent that. Or so she said. I sat on her shag carpet for an hour with a litter of 6 kittens, trying out names until she felt safe. I left with $600 and the smell of kitty litter on my clothes. That same day I was picking up a bouquet of flowers for someone's mom. You really never know what you're gonna get. Sure, the gigs can get a little creepy, but it honestly doesn't bother me. I'm making a good living and my days are interesting. That's good enough for me. Unfortunately, my family doesn't see it the same way. When they found out I flunked out of college and didn't have a real job, they had a lot to say about it. Shameless, disgraceful. My mom called me a loser during one of her wine-induced tirades. I'll admit, I'm not the son you brag about to your friends. I don't have a snazzy degree and trophy family like my siblings. But hey, I'm happy with who I am. That's more than most people can say. Sure, the work I do is strange, but it's not like I'm doing anything dangerous. Or so I thought. I was scrolling side gigs on my couch when I came across the job. $10,000 to pull a tooth. I drove to the address as quick as I could. Didn't want to risk someone trying to double book the gig. The house was nestled out in the woods on the nice part of town. A wall of sycamores opened up to reveal a white 2-story sitting atop a grassy hill. The house was fancy looking, but the vibes were off. No cars in the driveway, not a single light on inside, and yet everything was clean and well kept. The yard, the exterior, the driveway, it just felt empty. I tried to knock 3 times, but the door cracked open on the second rap. "Are you here for the job?" The man was short, pasty, and wearing a robe. He had a small ring of hair around his head, and the bushiest eyebrows I think I've ever seen. His eyes were almost as large as his smile. Yeah, that smile was wicked. Thick, brick-like teeth jutted in every direction. It was hard to look anywhere else. "Oh, yeah, I'm Dave." I reached out my hand to shake his. He ignored the gesture and pulled back the door to let me inside. I stepped into the dimly lit entrance. "So the job said you needed a, tooth pulled?" I asked anxiously. He started down the hall in front of me and waved me to follow. The entrance was bare like the outside. The walls were a cold gray. Light from silver fixtures illuminated dark tile beneath us. There were no pictures, decor, or furniture of any kind. The aesthetic was surgical, clean and cold. "Let's talk when we get to the room," he said very calmly. His voice was chirpy like a cricket. I was starting to feel the pressure now. Every step further down the creepy hallway was a step further from safety. Everything about this felt wrong. We continued for a few long minutes before turning the corner into a room. Plastic wrap crunched under my feet as I entered. It looked like a scene out of Dexter. The room was gray like the rest of the house, bare except for an old chair sitting at the center, and a cracked porcelain bathtub in the corner. Beside the chair sat a tall metal desk. An array of surgical tools glinted under the fluorescent lighting. Ugh. I started backing out before he interrupted me. I know. My apologies. This must appear sinister." He plopped himself in the chair and started adjusting against the seat back. "I'll cut to the chase. I need dental work." A chuckle escaped me. I'm no dentist, sir." He chuckled in response. "Yes, of course not. You see, I'm in a bit of a bind. I'm an immigrant. I came here a long time ago from a place I'm sure you've never heard of." His voice was chittery, like an insect. I couldn't pin down the accent. He pressed a small lever beneath the chair and leaned back. The fluorescent light dilated his pupils until his eyes were nearly completely black. "I've been tardy on my citizenship, and have gotten myself on our government's radar. I'd prefer to save myself a doctor's visit if I can. At least until my citizenship issue is dealt with. No need to raise any more eyebrows." Nothing about his rationale made sense. Even if all of this were true, why would anyone pay a random guy to do dental work? "So you're willing to pay me $10,000 just to pull a tooth?" I tried to quietly step back, but the crunch of plastic wrap gave away my unease. He laughed this time, a long, hearty laugh. No, dear boy. I'm going to pay you $20,000 to pull my tooth." My heart nearly skipped a beat. $20,000? No need to tell me twice. I quickly walked up to the metal tray beside him and picked up a small pair of surgical pliers. "Which tooth?" He grinned. "Top left, all the way back. It's infected and I'd prefer to just take out the whole thing. I have lots more after all." He laughed again, then opened his mouth wide. It was unnatural, like a serpent welcoming its next meal. I didn't waste any time. Within seconds I was clamping the pliers down on his large brick tooth. The tooth wasn't loose or discolored at all. It felt firm under the pliers. That's when I got a good look at the rest of his mouth. How many teeth does a normal adult have? 30-something? I counted 30 on the top alone. They were crowded. Some branched out of the gums like gnarled porcelain, while others simply budded between larger teeth. But they weren't dirty. They were clean. Pearly white. I was stuck in a trance until I heard him say, "Go ahead." The words were muffled from my hand in his mouth, but he sounded sure of himself. I clamped down and pulled. Nothing. I thought I must have heard him, but he simply offered a thumbs up and returned to staring at the ceiling with his mouth agape. I yanked again. No luck. Again. A little more give that time. One more. Plop. I almost fell backwards but caught my balance at the last moment. The large tooth was finally out. Bits of gum tissue and nerve endings hung loosely at the base. I dropped it on the metal table beside the chair and decided it was time to talk business. So, about the money. 40,000, he muttered. His body remained fixed in the chair. His eyes were glazed and blood dribbled down his chin from my handiwork. 40,000? For one tooth? He chuckled, blood spraying across my shirt and catching me in the face. I started frantically wiping it off. No, 40,000 for you to keep going. I smeared what remained of the blood off my forehead and took another step back. How many teeth? He spat a clot of blood onto the plastic wrapping below and sunk back into the operating chair. Until I say stop. He shot me a bloody grin and opened his mouth once more. A rational man would have ran. For some reason, I couldn't bring myself to. Maybe the other jobs just desensitized me. Maybe the money was too good to pass up. Whatever the reason, I decided to let it play out. I got to work on the other side of the mouth. This next tooth was smaller and round, not bricky like the first one. It popped out with a loud click. The blood really started to flow now. He didn't even wince, same as the first time. I pulled the tooth beside it, working my way around the morbid ring of enamel. 2, 3, 4 teeth. The blood was getting unmanageable. He kept having to take spit breaks, just so I could see what I was doing. The swelling in his head was gnarly. Then came the pain. Small whimpers and groans escaped the strange man. His hands were tight and pale as he gripped the armrests at his sides. The sight was unbearable. The bloody pliers were heavy in my shaking hand. Bile was building in the back of my throat. I took a shallow breath and started backing away, but he gripped me by the forearm before I could get far. Sick. His mouth was so swollen he could barely speak at this point. 60,000. Don't stop. 60,000? There's no way he's telling the truth. 60,000 for this? And yet, I chose to believe. I swallowed hard and got back to work. The next hour is hard to remember. I just kept going. I was on autopilot, mechanical, emotionless. His whole head was twice its original size now. He was choking and moaning in pain as I tore through whatever remained. I must have gone through 40 teeth at this point. About halfway through, I stopped collecting them on the metal tray. I let them fall to the waxy, plastic-covered floor. I tried to remain focused, but questions kept bubbling up in my mind. What kind of being chooses this? Who would pay thousands of dollars to have his own teeth torn out? I reached for the next tooth with my pliers, but nothing remained. I removed them all. Every single one. I turned away from the mess in front of me and vomited on the floor. I was trying to compose myself when the man began to stir. He stumbled out of the chair and began making his way toward the porcelain tub in the corner of the room. His whole body from the nose down was covered in crimson. The pain crippled him. Pressing his broken body to the floor, he got on his knees and felt his way to the rim of the tub. His eyes were swollen shut so he could no longer see. I watched in horror as he dropped the blood-stained robe and practically fell into the tub. Ice water splashed onto the wrapped floor, sending a wave of teeth and gore lapping at my feet. The broken enamel chattered at my blood-stained boots as if they were still anchored to a mouth. He sat himself up and rested his large head against the back of the tub. It was surreal watching this bobble-headed thing try to collect itself. Its eyes were swollen shut, gums spilling out of the middle of its stretched lips like loose intestines. Then I heard a sound. A wheezy laugh. His body jerked and spasmed as chuckles escaped the small gaps in his face. Just then, I heard loud raps upstairs. Tiny footprints were approaching from somewhere above. None of this was making any sense. I had to get out. I sprinted back the way I came. The fluorescent lights above pulsed overhead as I made my way to the exit. I could still hear the laugh, the sound of many things making their way to the bloody mess I helped create. I was a few strides from the front door when something snagged my foot and sent me tumbling into the door frame. I shook the fall off and frantically wrapped the culprit off my foot. It was a bag. A dark bag that blended into the black tile floor so well I could barely see it. Stacks of bills were spilling out the top. This was my payment. Someone, or something, arranged for me to have it. I grabbed the 2 black duffels and made my way out the door. Before I knew it, I was peeling down the long cement road under the cover of sycamores. I'm not sure what to think about what happened that night. I haven't even bothered to check the bags of cash. They're still in the back of my car. A bloody reminder of the hell I put myself through for money. When I close my eyes, I still see him. I can't get the image out of my head. The toothless thing convulsing in the bathtub. As I sit here in bed, a sound startles me. It's side gigs. I received a new message. It's the man from yesterday. Just a single line of text. An ominous 4 words. Same time next week. I want to start by saying my daughter is a completely normal kid. She's 4. She draws horses that look like lumpy clouds. She asks why the sky is blue at least 3 times a week, even though we've answered it. And her current thing is stickers. She puts them on everything. I found one on the bathroom mirror this morning. She is not a weird child. She is not an anxious child. She does not watch things she isn't supposed to watch. I want all of that on the record before I tell you what happened. She was at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. She does this every morning. She gets herself set up with a piece of paper and her crayon box before anyone else is even awake. I'm used to walking down to find her mid-drawing, totally focused, not even noticing I'm there. I made coffee. She slid a piece of paper across the table at me without looking up. It was our house. She draws it the same every time. Same boxy shape, same lopsided chimney in the corner that she's weirdly proud of. Our family lined up in front of it in a row. Stick figures with her little scribbled attempt at our names floating above each head. I counted the figures. 6. I have 3 kids. My wife and I make 5. I counted again. Still 6. The extra figure was at the back, half tucked behind the house like it was leaning out from behind the wall. It was taller than all the others. She'd drawn it in black crayon and pressed down hard enough that the paper had torn slightly along some of the lines. She hadn't put a name above it. I sat down across from her. "Hey," I said. "Who's this one?" She didn't look up from what she was working on. "That's the one who watches from the yard," she said. I kept my voice even. "What do you mean, watches from the yard?" "At night," she said, like it was obvious. "When you turn the lights off, she stands out in the yard and watches the windows." I asked her what the figure looked like. "She," I said, because my daughter had said she without hesitating. My daughter looked up at me then. She does this thing when she thinks you're being slow about something, where she tilts her head a little to the side. "She looks like Mom," she said, "but her eyes are wrong." I picked up the drawing and went upstairs. My wife was still in bed. I sat on the edge and handed her the picture without saying anything. I watched her look at it, watched her face. She went quiet in a way that wasn't normal quiet. "I had a dream last week," she said, her voice slower than usual. "I was standing in the backyard. It was nighttime. I was looking up at the house, at the windows, looking in at all of you." She stopped for a second. "I don't think it was a dream." We haven't said anything to the kids. I've been checking the locks at night. I don't know what else to do with this. I don't know how my 4-year-old knew what my wife dreamed, or whether she did know somehow, or whether there's something else going on that I don't want to think about too hard. The drawing is still on the kitchen table. I haven't moved it. I don't really want to touch it again.